Hi, in this video I'm going to explain polygroups, which is a system in Unreal Engine 4.26 that lets you edit triangle meshes like they're polygon meshes. So this is a feature of modeling mode, so I'm going to switch to modeling mode. And I'm just going to disable all screen messages to get rid of that pop-up. Alright, so as you know, in Unreal Engine, all meshes are triangle meshes. When you import say a polygon mesh from an external DCC, it gets triangulated. So here I've switched on a brush wireframe, and you see that the whole world is made up of triangles. We can turn off that sky sphere. Let's say this piece here, you see made of triangles. And if you've tried out modeling mode at all, and you've clicked through these tabs, you might find try edit, and if you start try edit on one of these pieces, you'll see that you can do things like pick triangles and vertices and edit the shape. If you were to switch to the Polygroups tab and run poly edit on this shape, you'd see that you can't select anything. It doesn't seem to have any polygons, even though there's some nice sort of planar faces there. Now, if you've done a significant amount of 3D modeling, you know that editing a mesh like this, trying to do anything by just directly editing triangles, is a horrible experience. And so on these kind of especially low poly shapes, no one wants to do that. And so you know, might seem a bit confusing why you can't just directly edit these pieces. But if you go use our primitive tools and we say create a box, and we switch back to that poly edit tool, you see that now I can select these faces. So what's the difference? This is still made of triangles, and even when we switch to brush wireframe, you can see it's still a triangle mesh. It's not a polygon mesh, but we can edit it like it's a polygon mesh. And so what allows us to do that is polygroups. So polygroups essentially are a way to group the triangles of this mesh into faces, and then some of the different tools understand how to manipulate those faces and create them. So if I do poly edit on this tool, actually first I'll show you a way to see the polygroup. So you might hope that there would be like a show flag that would let you see the polygroups. Unfortunately, we don't have that. There's two ways you can see the polygroups. I mean, you can run the poly edit tool, and that will show you these groupings of faces. You can also run the inspector tool and turn on this is labeled polygon borders, and now you can see those pink edges. Those are the boundaries. But the tool that shows it the best is not this Polygroups tool. I'll show you that later. That in fact creates polygroups. But the select tool, if we switch to the select tool and change this face color mode to by group, you can see the lighting here. Let's see. Let me get a little bit different lighting. You can see that there's different colors on those faces. And those are the polygroups. And so I can even, in this tool, do things like create a new polygroup. I'll show this a bit more, but I'll just show a quick example. So if I select that one face and say create polygroup, it gets a different color. Now if I go back into poly edit, those are separate poly faces, and I can do something like say inset this and extrude it, and as I do these operations, you see that I'm making up these faces. If I accept that and go back into the select tool, you see that I've built up poly faces or polygroup faces on this mesh. So that's the sort of gist of polygroups. And so I'll just go back to primitives to explain a few things. So let's say take this box tool, change these subdivisions up to 2. We'll make a box and a cylinder. See, I've got per face, the polygroup. So here we can change this polygroup mode. I'm going to leave it at per face for now. We'll make a sphere, and we'll make a sphere box. And then I'm just, so that it's faster to jump around, I'm going to combine all these. So I'm going to use transform, combine, and delete the sources, make a new asset. So now those are all merged together. The reason I did that is so I can just jump into select. Let's turn off the wireframe, and we can see the different types of polygroups. So you see on the box we've got groups on each face. On the cylinder we've got one on the top and one for the whole sides. And then in the sphere we've got none, because this sphere topology doesn't have an obvious grouping of faces. And then on this box sphere we've got, which is the cube normalized, we've got the cube faces projected. So now if I go do that again, this time with per quad, make a box, cylinder, sphere, a sphere box, you might get a sense. Let's combine all those again. What's going to happen, which is that, oh, that seems to be a bug. On the cube we got oh, you know what, it didn't save the setting, did it? It didn't. Okay, let's do that one more time. That's a bug. Should save in each of these tools per quad, sphere per quad, and sphere box per quad. Select those, transform, combine, and then we start select. You see now we've got per quad. So on this, high-res sphere, that's kind of probably not useful on either of them, but you can see we did get per quad except for the pole where we get triangles. The cone, we still got one face on the top here. Again, and because of the triangles, it's a bit arbitrary. The triangulation of this is not ideal. But so you can see these are the same meshes. So if we just turn on wireframe, you see that they're exactly the same triangles, but they have different polygroup topology, we call that. So what that means is that when I do a tool like polyedit, on this version I can select all these more granular faces, well, including very extreme high resolution kind of quad triangulation, while on the one back here it's at a higher level, right? So then I can do edits, and you'll see actually something I was going to show you later, which is that the edits are at the polygroup level, not at the triangle level. So here, as I move this, I'm stretching out all those connected poly faces versus here if I do that, it'd be a lot of work to select all these top ones. But it would only move the immediate neighbors. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So the primitive tools create polygroups automatically on the primitives they make. So do most of our other creation tools. So like the polygon tool, right? If I draw this shape, then it's also got poly faces defined. And if I go to polyedit, I can just quickly grab those faces and manipulate the shape. And so do the other creation tools like polyrevolve, cut revolve, polypath, even mesh booleans. If I make say a box, we want to put this back to per face, and a sphere box, put that here. So these, remember, now they've got some poly faces. And if I do a mesh boolean, subtract that, and then go back to polyedit, you see that the poly faces from the sphere came along. So even with booleans, you can do sort of structured polygon-like editing combined with booleans with poly faces. Okay, and so I showed you how to see them with the selection tool, even how to create them. So what about if you have existing models or imported models? No imported model will import with polygroups because we don't currently support that, and any existing assets won't have that. So if I've got, say, this part here and I just want to lift this up a little bit, and I'm going to do it with the polyedit tool. So that's what the Polygroups tool is for. So when you want run polygroups, this doesn't show me the polygroups. What it does is it finds new ones based on sort of face angle. So let's do it. Let's just do it on here. So we just often with just the default settings, it'll do a pretty good job on any plane or things like this. So if I accept that, now I go to polyedit. and I can make my structured edits to this shape. I can select edges. I can do all these edge operations. I can even do in this tool, so if I wanted to quickly break this up, I can do decompose, and that will split up the selection into separate faces. I can do, maybe a little kind of weird stuff like merge these. Now they're one face. Even though it's not planar, I made that essentially one big polygon. I can retriangulate it. Now it's just going to flip that edge. Basically, it's only two. So that's how you can sort of build polygroup topology for an existing model. So it works fine on these nice planar shapes. We could do the stairs, anything like that. Now what about this round cube? If we run the Polygroups tool on this, what we're going to see is that we're going to get sort of strips here. Basically, we can try and get a setting on this angle tolerance but it's going to be really hard to get what we want, which might be like to separate out those flat faces. So I'm going to leave it like this, and we'll use the selection tool. So that's often what you have to do if you want to create polygroup topology for a shape that is sort of something specific. So I made the brush really small here, so that makes it easy to select. So you see I can see these polygroup faces. What I can do is I can change the selection mode to all in group, and now I can just paint whole groups. You could also use, say, all in angle, and it will do other kinds of selections. So I'm going to create a polygroup for there. I'm going to just create a polygroup here and one here, and I'm just going to stop there. So now we've created we've sort of separated out those soft fillets into separate pieces. So now I could do something like grab this corner and do a sort of edit of the whole shape, just based on that selection on that area. Right, so now you can see when I grab and select a poly face and I move it around, the neighboring connected faces deform, but only the directly connected faces. So this green face I've got highlighted right now, right? It's not moving. The triangles in these regions in between are being kind of softly stretched out equally, but then the adjacent faces don't move. So you can control that by controlling the polygroup layout. So if I wanted these faces to all softly deform as I move that face, what I can do is go back into the select tool, right? Say, create a polygroup for all those faces. Now if I go into poly edit, now that whole face is moving, right? That corner vertex is also moving. So now you see back here some things I don't necessarily want to happen are happening. I might actually want to select this edge here. Can I get that edge? We turn off vertices and faces is sometimes necessary. Right now I could just move that section there. So right, the polygroup layers are essentially non-destructive. They're separate from the triangle, so I can always rebuild the different polygroup topology. It might take a bit of time, but I can always do that for a mesh, regardless, without changing its actual triangles. Right, okay, and I showed you the select tool has this create polygroup tool and all in group selection. You can also use these other selection options as a way to create polygroups for an existing model. So in addition to the poly edit tool, we have a few other tools that are really useful for kind of poly modeling. So I'm going to make polygroups for these stairs. They didn't have it because they are a default Unreal asset. So now if I wanted to say maybe make these stairs a little bit less clean, like maybe they're supposed to be a little bit run down, we have these other tools in the Polygroups tab, Edge Insert and Loop Insert. So Loop Insert basically tries to insert, and you can actually see the wireframe. You can turn that off if you don't want to see it. Basically tries to find quad loops that it can insert, and then it will insert an edge along that quad loop. And there's a bunch of options. You can use fixed distances. You can split it in the middle with even. but I'm just going to use sort of interactive, right? And I just click, and that's going to make poly faces across all those loops now. And I accept, of course, you can't see any change, but if we look at the wireframe, it's there. And in poly edit now, these are separate, right? I got faces turned off. These are separate faces now that I can select. Similarly, edge insert lets me just kind of draw a particular poly edge. And an interesting thing about polygroups is that they don't have the same kind of constraints as polygon meshes do, which tend to, have limits on how complex a polygon can be. We can make pretty arbitrary polygroups and still work with them. I'll show you how far that goes later, right? But now I can maybe do a little bit of editing and make these stairs slightly more, a little bit less clean. Maybe I'm going to put some kind of rock texture on them. Anyway, so that's a demonstration of the edge insert and loop insert tools, which are super useful for all sorts of things. In a future video, maybe we'll focus a bit on different poly modeling strategies, but you can use these tools to do a lot of kind of decomposition of blocky shapes into pieces to make things like windows and doorways and boxes and things like that. Okay, so now, so polygroups are useful for poly editing, but quite a few of our other tools also can use polygroups as a means to kind of communicate what you want to have happen in certain cases. So I'm going to redo polygroups here, and I'm just going to quickly paint those groups again. Create polygroup. So you'll see on this cube right now, the faces are faceted. So we have a normals tool that can use, so if we want to recalculate normals, we can use face group ID. So face groups, you'll see the terminology is not consistent yet across all the tools. So polygroups and face groups mean the same thing. So if we use face group ID, now you can see that it computed smooth normals. So essentially it took the hard normal borders from the polygroup boundaries. Essentially those creases, those seams we saw in the poly edit tool are now where there's normal hard edges. So now we can sort of create some control over hard normals without having to resort to, oh, I lost the term that's used in other tools to indicate those hard edges. So this doesn't let you have sort of a floating hard edge like that might terminate in the middle of a face, but it's a quick way to sort of set up a shape for hard, set up the smoothing groups. That's the word I was looking for. Quick way to kind of indicate smoothing groups without having to go to sort of bit masks. Tools like the remesh tool also understand polygroups. So if I take this, I can, if I say wanted more mesh on here because I want to do some deformations, but I want to keep those crease borders, what I can do is I can set the group boundary here to be fixed. And now if I say set this up, turn this up to like 20,000. Let's hope this isn't too hard to see after the video encoding. It's working. Oh, actually I'm going to click this discard attributes otherwise. So this we call it the B shader. That indicates that it's computing a remesh of this shape in the background. To be honest, I'm not certain why it's taking so long. Oh, I want this to be refined. That's why. There we go. That was much faster. Okay, so you can kind of see here that there's a, although the triangulation got really regular everywhere else, there's still the lines of the polygroup boundaries are embedded in this mesh. And if I accept this and go back to poly edit, you'll see that they're still there. So you can see the faces are now this is no longer really anything remotely similar to polygons, right? But all the operations still work. Everything works the same way. I can still grab this face here, and it's still going to try and softly deform those surrounding faces. I mean, there's only so many triangles, they're going to get a little bit stretched out. And that's just what's going to happen. But it does allow you to have some kind of structure even on a high resolution mesh like this. So even if we do something like, we could do like a space deform to kind of bend this shape a little bit. Let's maybe bend it a little bit less. It's just something weird. It's all still there. If we go back to poly edit, now the faces are, you know, non-planar, all sorts of weird stuff has happened, but we can still make structured edits to those faces. I'll just mention the poly deform tool is actually quite a fun one on these kind of models. Oh, it's not, we don't really have enough triangles here to see the difference. But you see, yeah, it doesn't look great. We need some more triangles to really see the difference there. Okay, so another thing we can do is UVs. So we have a few UV tools, and if you had a shape like this that you might have modeled without UVs, and you want to get UVs, you can, you know, we have this auto unwrap tool. It's, well, let's just see how long it's going to take. On a high resolution mesh like this, take some time, and it will make kind of random islands. So you see we've got like a seam here. It's not too distorted. Well, over here it's not so good. So what you can do, and it might be obvious now, the name is group unwrap. So group unwrap unwraps by polygroup. So basically each polygroup becomes a UV island, and there's different unwrapping techniques. So the default is very fast, XMAP, but it's not the ideal one. So you probably want to use conformal. You see it does a kind of much nicer job of keeping kind of regular grid shapes. I'm just going to accept this without doing much here. So I might want to have gone in and merged some of these round edges if I was actually trying to make UVs, and then you can do UV layout. So you know, if you went in the static mesh editor on this shape here and turned on the UV layers, you'd see they're just kind of randomly placed. Also, I only merged, right when I did this, I only merged the front faces we see here. The back ones are still all separated. So we're going to get some weird results in the UV layout, but I'm going to do it anyway. We can do this UV layout in viewport, and you see now I've got my strips from those two main corners. This UV layout is clipping. So this little UV layout view just kind of floats next to the shape, and we can move it around and zoom in, and you can see. So those big faces ended up laid out quite nice. I mean, they got quite good parameterizations, and if we had grouped all those pieces and laid them out, we would have sort of a decent UV parameterization of this shape that we could use for further operations. And that all would have worked on even the low-res mesh or the high-res mesh. And we could have actually done that before we remeshed, and then we would have been remeshing in UV space also, which is something to talk about probably in a future video. Another thing we can do is material assignment. So let's just create quick material here. Drop that in. Save this. Okay, so now if I wanted to say put that red material on a face of this shape, right, I've got my polygroups. So there's a selection tool, but in the triangles tab, we've got the edit mats tool. So this tool is actually the same. It's essentially the same as the selection tool. So it's a brush-based. Oh, well, I selected all in group. It's a brush-based tool where I can make a selection like this. Let's change the shader back. Face color group by none. And the interface here is a bit funny, but what I can do is I can add a second material here and then set selected material to 1 and assign that selected material, and now I've assigned the material to that selection. Right? So now if I wanted to, let's clear the selection. If I wanted to select everything in that face, I can switch this back to all in group, just click, it's selected the polygroup, or actually let's maybe do those side faces, right? And assign that selected material, and now I've got that material assigned to these areas, right? And so polygroups can also be used to define material regions. One limitation which I suspect you'll run into right away is that you might want to have different polygroups for normals versus UVs versus materials. It might be useful to have separate polygroup layouts. That's something we're looking at supporting in the future, but right now we only support one polygroup layer in all these tools. Basically, that's polygroups. I'm just going to show you one little bit more complex example. So let's just jump over here where we got some space, which is that this is all, I'm talking about this on poly meshes, but polygroups, so this is a bunny mesh that I imported, right? And if I jump back to that select tool and change this to by group, as you might expect on a default import, there's no polygroups. But this one here, I've painted out some polygroups on it. So this has nothing to do with really with polygons anymore, but it's the exact same thing. So you see I've painted this up into some pieces, and so now I can do different things with those pieces, right? So I can, for instance, go in and do a group unwrap. You see it flattened each of those pieces into a separate island. You can kind of see the island boundaries. Now the ears got kind of stretched out, so what I could then do is quickly go back into select tool. I'm going to set this to visible. It's a quick way to just brush in only the things I can see. Then I'm going to just click this optimize selection, create polygroup. Let's do it on the other side. Brush is a bit big. Optimize selection. All the optimize does is it kind of cleans up little sharp edges. Create polygroup. So now we've got some separate groups on the ears. I actually want to make on the back side too. Now what I'm going to do is switch this back to volumetric. So that looks kind of bad because it selected both sides. Going here, shift, volumetric's a bit tricky. So what I can do is quickly switch this back to all in group and shift click. Oops, oh right, we have to make the brush smaller. Shift click and it deselects the group only. Unfortunately I have to jump back and forth, but I can create a polygroup for here. Let's go back to volumetric, make this big again, optimize, all in group, shift click. Whoops, I want to shift click this side, create polygroup. All right, so now I've got more complex topology, and if I do a group unwrap now, I get separate islands on those ear pieces, front and back, separate islands. And we can see that in poly edit, right? We can see now we've got these separate pieces here. And so I can still do things like grab that and edit it the same way I was before, and it's kind of neat actually. Because we're basically kind of pulling that head around. You can see it's doing a kind of soft deformation bounded by the polygroup boundaries. This piece next to it is just rigidly translating because it's fully connected and it's only got this boundary piece here, which is another kind of something you might have to get used to with polygroups, because you can have a polygroup with a hole. So this, right, polygroup, to think of it as a polygon is a little bit weird. It's got holes in it. It's got some holes in the inside, right? And so, and the bottom ones here are connected to, right, basically kind of nothing. How this will behave with these holes in it makes sense for something like UV layout or normals. It's a little bit less clear how it's going to behave with editing, and you have to get a sense for it. So one thing we could have done, for instance, is create some more polygroup, like another polygroup on the back here, and that would have connected these holes. It would kind of split up these holes, and they wouldn't be holes anymore, and that would allow us to kind of pin things like the backside and face and let us move the front. actually, so sort of something interesting is if you want to do kind of structured shape edits like that, you can just do things like you make a big region, make a little region, create a polygroup for that. Now if we go back into poly edit, I can grab this region and pull on it, right? And I'm doing like a soft sort of deformation of that nose. I mean, it is limited by the boundary shape, so you might want to go in something like sculpt after. Oh, let's just wait for that shader to compile and just shift, give it a little click to smooth it out. And now you can now you have a kind of structured edit. Actually, if you go back, because we smoothed that out, if you go back into poly edit, I think now it's going to behave a little bit nicer because we smoothed everything out. You can still kind of see the border a little bit. But so you can actually kind of set up a mesh like this with polygroups as kind of handles, almost like saved selections and fall off regions if you want to like experiment with a set of edits. Okay, so that was a long video, but polygroups are sort of a central concept in modeling mode in Unreal, and as we continue to develop these tools, polygroups are going to be very important across the tool set. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask them in the video comments. Thanks for watching. Bye.